To lead us through this discussion this afternoon on the lives of the saints, the entrance into the lives of the saints, prayer with the saints, I want to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Dr. Leonard Dilorenzo. It's a delight to do so because not only is he a remarkable scholar, a remarkable teacher, but also my best friend, so that's fun. Dr. Dilorenzo, is director of Notre Dame Vision and associate professional specialist in the Department of Theology at the University of Notre Dame. He's the author of 2 books that are presently available, though he writes like he's running out of time, like a certain Hamilton, that's a reference to. He's the author of Witness, Learning to Tell the Stories of Grace That Illumine Our Lives through Ave Maria Press, 2016. And this is a book that has won awards. And then this is a book that will win awards once awards are bestowed upon it. Work of Love, a Theological Reconstruction of the Communion of Saints, which is his doctoral dissertation through Notre Dame Press. And it's very pricey, but Lenny has said that if you're interested in it, he has found ways to sell it cheaply through some copies he has, not illegally. This is not like underground market, for the black market for theological tomes.
I'm just taking pictures of it.
Just taking pictures of it. He sells copies of it in New York on a blanket somewhere, so with Roy bands. Okay. According to a conventional understanding of sanctity, meaning being really good at things, Lenny would be a saint. He's one of the finest teachers I've encountered who woos his students to discover truth and beauty in the classroom. As a writer, his prose combines sophistication with persuasion. That's a rare feat in the academy, to have both sophistication and persuasion. He has a deep sense of what it means to be formed as a human being, something he performs in his very popular course on campus, the Character Project. As director of Notre Dame Vision, he's formed nearly 1,000 undergraduates at Notre Dame and seeing their lives as participating in the lives of the saints. But of course, Lenny would not be satisfied with this description of sanctity. No, for him, the saint, as he writes in his recent book, is to recognize the saint who enjoy beatific life in communion with the glorified Christ is to accept their desire for communion with us. To pray for the well-being of our beloved dead is to beg God to mercifully draw them into this same glory, and therefore for them to become wholly configured to the desire for the communion of the whole body. To engage in this liturgical prayer is to yield ourselves to a desire that is given to us, which completes us, but which requires the death of our own selfish aims and individualizing concerns. The liturgy thus forms generous hearts. With this claim, few can do better with our topic today than Lenny, Jesus Christ and the Sanctoral Cycle of the Liturgy.
Thanks, Tim. I must have been pretty jacked up on caffeine when I wrote that. You can tell. I'm not writing that. The longer the sentences are, the more caffeine I've had. So I remember punctuation. I need punctuation when there isn't caffeine. Maybe there should be t-shirts that say that. No caffeine, provide punctuation. Full stop. Ellipses. To be continued, right? Well, I'm very happy to be here with all of you this afternoon. Unfortunately, this is the first time I've been able to be here, because as you've got a sense of last night, there are a number of different conferences and programs and gatherings, even through our own institute, going on concurrently. And I've been attending to some of those in different ways, but was looking forward to being here with you. So this is near the end of my week and your week. We're sort of in eschatological time, which is what we're going to talk about in a sense. So this is all very perfect for all those reasons. And I suppose since I haven't been here, I haven't quite known what you've explored and talked about, except there is a little backdoor to knowing what's going on, which is Twitter. So part of my research was going through the Twitter hashtag to see what everybody else had said and what you all are saying about what everybody else said. So I have a little bit of a sense of what's been going on, and even just with Tim's introduction and recapping some of the previous talks, it was resonating with me. It's like, oh yeah, I saw that in 106 characters. I saw that in 15 characters. I saw that in close to 140, broken up in a few different tweets. So, out of the Twitter sphere and here into the glorious 100 to 104 McKenna Hall, I bid you a good afternoon and hello. 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 I don't think I'm going to say anything much different than what's been said already, though I may try to say things in a slightly different way, and maybe that's appropriate for a conference on the liturgy. Finding different ways of saying more or less the same thing all the time. Is that right? To be able to hear it differently, but also the sort of joy of being able to say it differently. And maybe something of what I'm going to do this afternoon has to do with that. Here's the main thing I want to sort of revolve around. I want to think about the Sanctoral Cycle as offering training in the Beatific Vision. Or you can put it another way and just change the preposition, the Sanctoral Cycle as offering training for the Beatific Vision. I suppose you could try other prepositions and see what that does to your imagination, but I'll leave it at just those two. And I want to start with something that just happened to grab my attention a few years ago, not having to do with the Sanctoral Cycle per se, or liturgy per se, at least right away. And it's certainly not something that I discovered on my own. It has been noted quite a few times before. But it's the time a couple of years ago it caught my attention and I started to think about it. And that is a consistent theme near the end of the Gospels when we come to the resurrection appearance narratives. In particular, in John's Gospel and in Luke's Gospel. That consistent theme is that the disciples cannot see Jesus. Or they can't recognize him. Actually, it's both of those things. They can't see him, nor can they recognize him. So here is a quick little rundown of some of these episodes. First, at the tomb, Mary Magdalene comes to anoint a dead body. She looks into the tomb, which is empty. She turns around and sees Jesus standing there, but she did not know it was Jesus. And as we know, she supposes it's the gardener. Looking at him, doesn't see him. On the Sea of Tiberias, they go out at night. In consecutive verses, we're told that it's night, and then it is daybreak when Jesus stands on the seashore, and they look to him, but they don't see him. They don't know it's him. Or, in the upper room, in Luke's Gospel, Jesus himself stood among them, but they're startled, they're frightened, and they suppose that they saw a spirit. They don't see him. They see something. Or lastly, we'll spend some time with this actually this afternoon. The disciples on the road to Emmaus. Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him, as we're told. Like I said, this caught my attention several years ago and has kept my attention in some way since then. Asking the question, why can't they see him on the one hand? Why don't they recognize him on the other hand? And there's some quick and ready explanations. I mean, he was dead. Now he's not. That seems like a pretty good explanation. We have some kind of sense of the light of divine glory that is the resurrection. Yeah, I mean, I suppose not quite capacitated to see that. That's going to be part of it. And yet, even when they see something, they don't recognize. So here's what I'd like us to maybe consider for this afternoon. Again, I don't imagine I'm going to say anything totally new, maybe just say some things in a different way. I want us to allow ourselves to become curious about the relationship between blindness and sight, and using some of these episodes as our entryway to that. The relationship between forgetting and remembering, and sort of generally between ignorance and intimacy. And I suppose at various stages of life, intimacy is only possible with ignorance. And you have to pass through that. But we'll leave that aside. Those are just the things that are rifling through my head. We'll spend some time with this blindness and sight thing. We'll then spend some time with the forgetting and remembering thing. We'll eventually get to talking about the saints. We'll start a little bit by talking about liturgical formation, liturgical vision, and try and put these together. I would like to start, though, back down here on the bottom with the road to Emmaus. We'll zoom in on this, and I'll say some things that you already know. Which is that, in the road to Emmaus narrative, delivered to us is the form of the Catholic liturgy. We know this. We will see the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist and the dismissal there. The basic form, at least. As we start here and go through the things to come, I'm going to be concerned not so much with how the Sanctoral Cycle works, as I am interested in why it matters, why we do that. You would be much better to speak about probably both of these things, but at least how it works, for sure. But here, we'll look at a couple of different segments of this scripture passage. First, keeping in mind they're blind, we're told this at the beginning, and maybe allowing ourselves to be curious again about the question, how do they come to see? Like, how do they pass over into seeing? We're told right at the beginning, Jesus draws near to them. And perhaps we pass by that looking for the action to come. And maybe the most important thing has already been said. He draws near to them. But then right away we're told what we already read, that their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. Their eyes. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But as this narrative unfolds, and as the course of treatment sets in, how are they healed? And this is where we get those liturgical movements. They tell him all the things they have seen, but they don't understand, they don't recognize. And he listens. He even asks a sort of prompting question, another question. First, what are you talking about? And then what sort of things? And they say all the things. And he says, fools, how foolish you are. You know, like a good minister would. Tell me what's going on with your life. Blah, 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 blah. Foolish! And then it says what he does. He breaks open the scriptures. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures, which I think we could say is everything, right? It's all pointing here. Imagine this has something to do with reforming their expectations, preparing for recognition, though it's not yet time. Because we get to the next part, as we know. They invite him into their home. They invite him to their table. Their bread is there. And we're told, as it happened, while he was with them at table, he took that bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. And with that, notice how there's two things. With that, their eyes are opened, and they recognized him. Their eyes are opened. They're made capable of seeing what they could not see before. And that vision works. It sticks. They recognize. In some way, I suppose you could say it makes sense, though I don't think that's quite strong enough. Right? We're going to deal with those two things as we go forward, so it's not the only thing I'm going to say about them. And then, of course, they recognize backwards. They remember in a new light, and they take that memory, that encounter within them in mission back to the others. The basic form of the road to Emmaus narrative. The two things here that I just want us to pause with are, one, their eyes are opened, and I'd like to suggest that's them becoming capable, being made capable of seeing what they were not capable of seeing. The second thing they recognized, which in a way you could say what they see matters to them. Lots of things we see but don't stop to recognize. Both of those things are happening here. And I'm going to give us some examples of that. All right? So here's where we're going to go. Good news, I don't do drugs. Instead, I listen to podcasts, which gives me all kinds of different ideas in my head when I'm driving through Indiana farm towns, driving my son to whatever soccer event is happening within the greater 3-state region here. Steve Jobs had to do drugs to have vision. I just have podcasts. It's much healthier and safer. So I want to listen to a couple things, or actually we're going to follow some things that I found. And I want to start with this first thing that I mentioned in terms of what happens here. Their eyes were opened. That is to say, I want to ask something about what we can see, what we're actually capable of seeing. And I'm going to move out of the sort of spiritual figurative talk, and I want to actually mean this quite physically and literally. What are we capable of seeing? And I'm going to ask that in terms of colors. What colors are we capable of seeing? Actually, on one of these little trips to whatever game my son was playing in, Caleb, who's 11, who has a sort of analytical mind, and once we get talking, he'll just pick up on something, and there's a question or an insight or something weird that he's found. So I'm his dad, and that's his godfather, so this is where it comes from. But we're driving, I kid you not, we're driving several weeks ago, and just out of the blue, which I guess will be meaningful, he said, when we look at colors, how do we know we're looking at the same thing? Oh, well, right? How do we know you're saying that's red and I'm saying that's red, but how do we know that we're both seeing the same red? And actually, that's a little bit of a trippy sort of question, and then you don't want to go too far with that because you start questioning everything. Is anything there, or are we just saying things and who knows? But in any event.
He's going to teach Intro to Philosophy.
Yes, indeed. Intro to Philosophy. He's already a doctoral student in the philosophy program. No pedagogical experience or strategy, just saying things, which is what happens in introduction to philosophy courses. Are we recording this? Oh, never mind. But that's a really interesting question. We can read that back into the Emmaus narrative or the other ones where there's not seeing, and we can say, where is the locus of the failure, as it were? Is it the object, the thing that's meant to be seen, in this case Jesus, that is the reason they can't see? Or is it the ones who are seeing? That is, does it have to do with their eyes? Where is color? Is it out there? Is it in our eyes? Where is the seeing? Is it in the thing or is it in us? We're going to see it's kind of in both, but I want to start with that question. What colors can we see? Well, human beings, and we're not going to deal here with the 10% of men who are colorblind. We can talk about why that is. But human beings with the full complement, the full capacity of vision, their eyes work as at full range what they're able to do. We see, when we look at a rainbow, these colors. Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, which is a fake color, and violet. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. And that is the band, the width of the colors we see. Within there are subtleties and shades that we detect. But as we look at light passing through a prism, like rain, and being refracted, various angles, we pick up, our eyes are tuned to, sensitive to these colors. Now, we're going to be talking about colors a little bit, and to move this just from vision, I think we ought to have a little bit of sound that goes with this. So we're going to hear, as it were, colors. Does anybody have synesthesia? No? Okay, because we would be entering into your mind for a moment, which is when they play music, they see colors. It's a very strange thing. I just like keep a little distance from those people because they don't know what's going on. Like when I speak, they're seeing a color perhaps, and it's just a little bit creepy. But in any event, here's what it sounds like.
3, 2, 1.
Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. Okay?
Says who?
Well, so here's great question. Okay. What is being given to us is a representation of the distinctions between the colors, right? So put into, Carolyn, tonal harmonies, is that, yeah, great, excellent. So we can hear the distinctions and the relationships and not just see them, okay? But if a dog looks at a rainbow, does a dog see what we see? And the answer is no. A dog can look at the same rainbow, the same light passing through the same prism, and a dog will see this. Blue passing into green with a little bit of yellow. And it'll sound, if we were to put it to sound, like this with a little explanation moved in.
Blue, we'll be able to see blue just fine. So we'll see a rainbow starting with blue, same blue we see, and then grading off into green, same green as us, and then disappearing. And then going in there, and a tiny bit of yellow thrown in. That's it?
That's it. Yeah. Why? This is Radio Lab. Why? You could hear Jad up and run. I'm Robin Coolidge. Yeah. Why? Well, because human beings, in our eyes, have color receptors tuned to 3 different frequencies of light, as it were. Red, green, and blue for the most part. And dogs have 2. That is to say, our eyes are capable of absorbing more light, more colors of light, and telling the difference between them than a dog's can. And it doesn't mean, therefore, that we just see one more color, because there's a multiplicative sort of dynamic that's going on here, that each of those bounces off the other one, and you get subtleties and shades and hues and all that stuff. So a human being likely sees something like 98 more shades and tones and colors and all of that stuff than a dog does. Okay, fair enough. Interesting, maybe. But maybe we can ask another question then. We see more than a dog sees, but do we see all there is to see when we see light passing through something, when we see light broken apart? And the answer is absolutely no. We do not see all there is to see. Well, let's talk about why. And let's move to another creature, the butterfly. And let's imagine for a moment together perhaps the most precious and delicate image that we could possibly imagine, which is a butterfly looking at a rainbow. Settle into that image, right? Take that into your heart. A butterfly looking at a rainbow. I Googled to see if I could see something. It's just really weird, cartoonish type things, butterflies flying off rainbows, and I just couldn't go that far. This is how far I could go. When a butterfly looks at a rainbow, what does a butterfly see?
Ultraviolet would see that, yep. Then it would see violet, and then blue, and then blue, blue, green, yep, and green, green, bluey, bluey, or whatever, right, and then orange and red and all that. Yep. We have very complicated lines.
What's going on here? Well, maybe you can guess this from the difference between a dog and a human. A butterfly has 6 different kinds of color receptors in their eyes. Very complicated eyes. And remember, each time you add a new one, there's an exponential growth in the thickness of the rainbow and in the texture of the rainbow, seeing in between the colors. So those blue, blue, greeny, greenies, or whatever they were saying, they can see these things we cannot see. It all just sort of blends together for us. Our eyes are not sensitive enough. We are not capable of seeing that. So let's put these three together. Dog, human, butterfly. What does it sound like? Well, this. Dog. It's not the best sound system. Human, a little bit fuller, a little bit wider. Butterfly, richer still. Okay, so there's more color than we can see. And as we hear it there, there's more richness, more depth, more subtlety, sort of wider range that a butterfly can see than we can see. But it sounds pretty close, though I'm saying that there's an exponential sort of movement or change. But how much more color is there than we can see? Well, to get at least a little sense of that, we have to move to another creature, this one, the mantis shrimp. We'll move into this. This creature that lives in very shallow, clear water around coral. And the mantis shrimp has 16 color receptors. We have 3, a dog has 2, and the difference between us and a dog is dramatic. A butterfly has twice as many as a human, and so the difference there is dramatic. And now we're talking about a mantis shrimp that has 16 different color receptors, each one of those being bounced off the other one to create all kinds of subtleties and hues and shades and all this stuff that we cannot imagine. If we could put this into sound, what would it sound like? Well, I don't know, like, let's have them teach
They would
us.
start the rainbow way, way, way inside where we see violet. They would see extraordinarily deep ultraviolet. And then they would go on through several kinds of ultraviolet, probably 5 or 6 kinds of ultraviolet. And then they would get to violet, which is now they're reaching our colors, and go through violet and violet blue and blue and blue green. Where they have those green, green, blue, blue, blues as well. Yep. And then they would go out to the reds. So they would be about as red as us when they got to the red end, but only in the red. Yeah.
What are you going to do with this mantis shrimp? Like, there's actually nothing here for us to see. Like, we could not put colors up on a screen, because what are those colors? We have, like, in some sense, no understanding or grasp of them. It's just beyond what we're capable of seeing. It's as if this little creature is just begging for our praise. So let's give it to it.
Yay.
I'm going to make you listen to this. Okay. Yes, please. And that is the end of the session. Right. I don't know if these are the kind of shrimp you eat. They're also like incredibly nasty, violent creatures. That's how they use light. Mm-hmm. I'm using this whole example here. Again, we're talking about like physical seeing in this case, a sort of like very literal thing. What can we see? To draw out this point that there is more to see than we're actually capable of seeing. That in order to see as a butterfly would see, or as a mantis shrimp would see, our eyes would have to be changed. It's not that we have to be told that they're super duper ultraviolet. We cannot see it. Our eyes would have to be changed. I'm using this to connect with all of this stuff that I've just done. Maybe it's too much, but I wanted to do it. All of this stuff to connect with that opening of the eyes. The opening of the eyes, not yet to the recognition, the opening of the eyes, a change in vision. And one thing I'd like to at least just suggest is that liturgical formation, perhaps we could think about it as an encounter with Christ who makes us capable of seeing his glory. In the Emmaus narrative, by word and by sacrament, their eyes are transformed. They are transformed. They're not simply reminded of something or taught. They're changed. The opening of the eyes. I'd like to maybe nudge us towards something like this, imagining you'd have to have new eyes to see some of the stuff we're talking about on the bottom here. A full range of beauty. That's the first part. But we're talking about not only liturgical formation, liturgical vision, or liturgical renewal, as it were, but in particular about the Sanctoral Cycle. And I'm going to suggest that this has something to do with coming to recognize Christ's glory. The encounter in the liturgy itself, particularly the sacramental encounter, is about being given the gift of a new vision. And the movement through the Sanctoral Cycle is part of the training in that vision to be able to recognize the complexity, the richness, the subtlety, the full range. I kid you not, just this morning, somebody talked to me about the very thing I was going to say right here, which is that when we think of the canonized saints, saints who appear in the canon, there seems to be a reaction or a natural impulse in response to that. That's something like, why only those saints? Right? It's like our democratic impulse. Like, why not? Why is it limited to those? In fact, this person this morning asked me, are there more saints than the ones that have been canonized? And we had a good talk about that. Yeah. But I'd actually like to flip that. That's a question I don't want to say it's a critique, though it might be of the church sort of like withholding honor. And there's things we could say about the canonization process for sure, but like those are the ones you're given permission to venerate. But maybe if we actually flip it, we can see actually the ones in the canon are the ones we're required to venerate. That there's a duty of veneration with these on behalf of the church. Not any individual person could venerate all of the saints in the canon well throughout their life. But on behalf of the church, especially in our liturgical movements, it is our duty to venerate the saints in the canon. Why? Actually, I think it's part of our duty in fidelity to the promises of Christ. It's part of our duty out of fidelity to the promises of Christ. I want to turn to just a couple pieces of text. One, just a little line from Sanctorum Concilium. For the feast of the saints, proclaim the wonderful works of Christ and his servants, and display to the faithful fitting examples for their imitation. Very succinct, lovely line. And with anything succinct and lovely, along comes the 20th century Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner to make it overly complex. Right? So here's Karl Rahner making this point. And I've given these to you on the handout. The church, he's writing here in his essay, The Church of the Saints, must be able to state her holiness in the concrete. She must have a cloud of witnesses to whom she can indicate by name. She cannot merely maintain that there is a history of salvation, somewhere out there, without it being known exactly where it takes place with real final success. But she must really relate that very eschatological history of salvation, which she is herself. The prize of her actual saints belongs to her innermost being and is not merely something which she also achieves on the side, something which has been inspired by a purely human need for hero worship. Take it what Ronner is saying is that the naming of our saints is an act of recognizing that Christ's redemption has worked, is working, and therefore will continue to work. That the promises have landed, that the grace has been received and moved and been efficacious. Where? Right there. That place. That time. That person. I suppose it's a way of saying his humanity is caught up in our humanity. Actually. Not just the pledge of it. It has taken place. His promises are true. His promises are efficacious. And that venerating a saint is proclaiming Christ has redeemed. Not just humanity in the abstract, but that humanity. This portion of our humanity. Concretely, here. What I'm going to be moving towards is saying something like, the saints will train us to expect the full range of Christ's beauty. But it starts from here, the sort of duty of venerating them, which isn't, as Ronner is saying here, and I think as the Constitution is saying, not just about uplifting the saints. It's an act of fidelity, an act of faith to Christ, to say it, to act it out, to practice it, to move into believing it. This is going to bring me back, therefore, to our little kind of unfolding analogy about seeing light. But in this case, we're not actually going to be talking about becoming capable of seeing. I'm actually going to talk about recognizing what we see. All right? So we're going to go back to this example, and I hope this is helpful. And we're going to talk about Homer. Who knows Homer? Right, yeah, I mean, John's right on this.
The other one.
The other one, that one, yeah. So that Homer, right? The ancient Greek epic poet. Homer of the fame of the Iliad, but perhaps especially the Odyssey. Do you know how many words are in the Odyssey? No, I do, right? Because it's going to be on my slide. 173,600, give or take, I imagine. 173,600. Well, in the 19th century, there's a British scholar who loves Homer, not just in a scholarly love, which is the strangest kind of love, but in a real sort of enjoyment, aesthetic sense. He loves Homer. And so he's going back over the Odyssey time and again, and the way you do when you love a really great, rich text is you find different strands and themes each time through, and you become sort of grooved to that movement, right? And on one of his passes through, being a lifelong reader of Homer, he really allows himself to be struck by something, which is that Homer has an incredibly bizarre way of using colors, of describing things. And he starts to really pay attention to this and write these things down. And it becomes a sort of fixation, almost an obsession of his, trying to figure out why is Homer describing that in this way? Not only is it not efficient, it in some cases just seems wrong. There are better ways to this. It is kind of stretching the boundaries of even good poetry. And so he's making this catalog, and then at one time he decides, you know what, I'm just going to see how many times he uses each color in the Odyssey. And here's what he found. Black. About 200 times. Homer uses black in the Odyssey out of that 173,600. White. About 100 times. Then there's a drop-off. Red, 15 times. Yellow, 10. Green, 10. What color's missing? Blue, 0. 173,600 words. No blue. How do you describe the sea without blue? The wine dark sea is what Homer calls it. The wine dark sea, which was the trigger at the very beginning that got him going on this little chase. So he picks up the Iliad, goes through it. What does he find? A lot of black, a lot of white, some of the other colors, no blue. He picks up other ancient Greek literature. A lot of black, a lot of white, some of the other colors, no blue. And he develops a hypothesis, which is this. The ancient Greeks must not have been capable of seeing blue, which is a ridiculous hypothesis. It takes more than 3,000 years for our eyes to develop. It took about 10 million. The ancient Greeks, 3,000 years ago, see the same colors. They're capable of seeing the same colors that Greeks today can see. As with the rest of us, their eyes have not significantly changed, have not significantly evolved. What was going on? Well, it begins to be discovered that this has to do with language, actually. It has to do with the development of language. That as languages develop, we develop words and categories for colors as we need them. In this sense, everything's in black and white to begin with, dark and light. That's a helpful distinction. It's meaningful. It's useful. You can make things with it. The next several colors, they go in different order depending on the language, the geographic region, the customs of the people. Red tends to come in next because the clay of the ground is red and you can make things with it, and when you fire it, it turns a different shade of red, and so that becomes meaningful. You can make stuff. But it goes back and forth. Greens might be important because between different plants, you would notice variations of these colors, and that becomes important. But you don't really make a lot of things, anything really, with blue. Now, you're all wearing blue around your neck. That's not from nature. It's a hologram. No, I don't know what it is. Blue isn't an important color in that same way, it turns out. All right, fair enough. The ancients, that sounds, again, like a theory, which it is. It would be helpful if we could see it kind of played out. And that's exactly what some researchers found. In Africa, there's a tribe called the Himba, who has a very primitive language. It's at a stage of development not as far advanced as many of the other languages in the world. And these researchers went there with a number of different tests, hip to this sort of theory, this realization about the development of language, and they brought with them some things for the folks there to see. In particular, this. On a computer screen, they would see these 12 blocks arrayed in sort of a circle. Each of them green. And if you see differences in the screen, there are no differences. It's just the projection. It's the same color, green, or as far as I can see. Kelly green. And then they would bring this up and they would ask us, which one is different? And unless you're one of the 10% of men who are colorblind, you're going to point out and say, that one, right? What color is it? Blue. It's blue. The other ones are very, very green. That one is very, very blue. And they sit, a member of the Himba tribe, one after the other, in front of the screen, and they just stare. They just stare. They don't see which one's different. What? So, are their eyes different? Are they incapable of seeing it? No, they assure us, same eyes, same possibilities. They can't see the difference. In their language, there is no word for blue. It's not a distinction that's meaningful. So here, as a member of the Himba tribe, just staring. This is actually a video right now. I'm just kidding. It is a still image, but I think it would be the same if it were a video. It's just staring. I had you for a moment. Here's a little explanation about it, and part of, one of the members that'll be explaining this has a British accent, so we know it's true, so I'm going to let him do it.
Call this guy named Jules Davidoff,
professor of neuropsychology, London University.
And a few years back he got interested in this particular tribe in Namibia called the Himba.
Like many languages in the world, they don't have a different word for blue.
You might think of them as like a very poor stand-in for Homer, all right? And to make a long story short, Jules went to Namibia. He sat down with a bunch of members of the Himba tribe, whipped out a laptop, and showed them 12 colored squares.
All identical except for one.
And there's actually some really cool video footage of his research assistant doing this. And he asked him, very simply,
which one is different?
Now, you look at this and you see that 11 of these squares are green.
A colour we would call green.
Very green. The other one is blue. This blue one, it's shouting. It's like, hey, I'm blue! Over here, I'm blue!
It's easy enough for us to do.
It's a no-brainer. But the Himba, who don't have a separate word for blue in their language,
they find this distinction a little difficult.
When they stare at this screen, they just stare and stare. They don't see the difference between blue and the green? No. Well, is there something wrong with their eyes?
No, definitely not. We completely rule that out. They don't see colour and individual colours differently.
But then, wait.
It's so easy to say that they're seeing different colours to us, and they're not.
Well, then how does he explain it?
Okay. When we decide to put colours together in a group,
and then give those colours a word, like blue,
something happens.
He says what happens is that now that there's a category for that thing, the thing in the category jumps out. It gets louder and louder to your eyes. The category actually feeds back on your perception, so you notice it more. You're saying that having the word for blue unlocks your ability to see blue? That's how it feels to me, and Jules says...
No, it's not quite that.
He says without the word, you're still seeing the blue, no matter what. You're just not, noticing it. Your eyes are just kind of glossing right over it. So you don't see it. It's hard. It's harder to spot, says Jules. Whatever, I don't quite understand that difference. But blue would not jump out and say high five the way it does with us. But if it doesn't jump out to that extent, then this is starting to sound very Gladstone-y to me. Maybe he was a little right, because if Homer had no word for blue and the word somehow enables the blueness of the blue, then maybe his world was less blue than it would be for us. Maybe the blue went through his eyes in the same way, but it perhaps didn't get into his mind in the same way. Yeah, blue didn't matter.
Blue didn't matter. See the difference here? They can see it, but it doesn't matter, so it doesn't pop out in some way. Now, that's a hard thing for us to grasp, except I was just staying out of town at someone's home, and one of my hosts was an interior designer, and we were talking about color because I was thinking about this stuff. And I could point to 2 or 3 colors, and I'd pretty much call them the same thing, and she's like, what are you talking about? She has all kinds of words for these colors. She'll look at that chair, and I'll say, that chair's blue. And she would say, no, it's not. There's a finer distinction that she's capable of. Or, if you've ever watched the movie Shrek with a child, you both laugh at totally different things. You see the same things, right? But the child who doesn't know the fairy tales and doesn't know the nursery rhymes, who hasn't been to Disneyland and analyzed the absurdity of the place, doesn't see what you see. They see it, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't pop out. Or somebody who's knowledgeable about football and somebody who's not knowledgeable about football watching the same thing, run, play, run, play, run, play. What are you talking? It was a trap, a counter, and a sweep. Or every 4 years, and it's only once every 4 years when I watch figure skating, and Scott Hamilton's like, triple Lutz! And I'm like, she's just spinning. I don't know what you're talking about, but you're so excited about it. It matters to him. He sees it. That's the sort of thing that's going on here. We see the same thing. We don't recognize it. It doesn't matter. All right, all of that, that's what I'm pointing back to this sort of thing we're talking about. Not being able to see, being able to see. Not being able to recognize, being able to recognize. I did all of that to make the point that the saints, in particular in this case, the Sanctoral Cycle, forces us, and I want to use that word forces us to look at all the shades, all the hues of Christ's humanity. That humanity which has been glorified. Learning to recognize what we weren't able to recognize before. This isn't therefore just about learning. This isn't therefore just about being able to see beauty. It's in some ways be able to appreciate beauty, to move into it, to have it matter. That's another way of saying the saints aren't the light. They testify to the light. Seeing them trains us to see the full range of Christ's beauty, beyond what we would expect, what we're ready to recognize. I think of Mary Magdalene here. In fact, I spent like one whole Easter just thinking about this for some reason. There's a lot of sort of a few odd things in that piece of scripture, John 20, when she's at the tomb. One of them, like much of the time, is that the conversation is just like missing each other, right? But one of the other things is she turns around, and then when he calls her name, she turns again, and I don't know what that looks like. She's already facing him, like now she's pirouetting or something. I don't know what's going on. But I wonder, like, there is a moment there where she just sees. She doesn't see fully, but she moves into an act of seeing that was not possible just a moment before her name is spoken to her. And I wonder if it is his humanity that shocked her. Like glorified humanity. Like, oh my God. I suppose I was thinking about, like, in some sense, and I don't mean this very literally, she's looking at, I don't know, herself in a way. Her humanity. She's not looking at herself, but it's the humanity that is her humanity that has been glorified. I don't know, I've just pondered that. Like, the sheer humanity of it is what surprised her. That's glorified human flesh. And I don't know, like maybe that's like suddenly seeing like a mantis shrimp sees, right? But seeing it is not yet recognizing it. It's just the unveiling, the disclosure of that beauty. We know with Mary Magdalene, she actually has to go some distance to recognize it. That's my point here in this section about the recognition, which is that the veneration of the saints is a training in seeing glorified humanity. And it's about, I take it, the tuning of our hearts and the tuning of our desires beyond what we would have expected, and oftentimes probably beyond what we would have wanted on our own terms. But I think this especially has to do with the Sanctoral Cycle. In liturgical practice, we're being, on the one hand, made capable of beholding glory, and on the other hand, we're being trained in how to be sensitive to it, wise to it, having it matter. This variety, diversity, richness, subtlety, particularity, concreteness, this place, this time, that flesh, right there. Which brings me to my last turn then. A question about humanity. In fact, the question about the humanity of the saint. What is the humanity of the saint? This sort of training and coming upon this redeemed, sanctified humanity over and over again. What are we actually gazing at? This will have something to do with forgetting and remembering. Well, I'd like to ask this question from the end, as it were, to make it an eschatological question. Because when we ask a question about a saint, we're asking about the fulfillment of the promises of Christ as it's entering into its consummation and culmination. And to sort of guide us here, I'd like to invoke St. Augustine at the end of City of God, Book 22, the very close, when all of that work that he's done in all of those thousands, hundreds, and moving into the thousands of pages has led him to imagine, follow those promises of Christ into the image of the end, contemplating Scripture there. And I've given you this passage too. What do the saints do in heaven? Here's the question. What are the saints doing in heaven? What are we bound for? Look at this in 3 parts. 1, this is Augustine. In the heavenly city, there will be freedom of will. It will be one and the same freedom in all and indivisible in the separate individuals. It will be freed from all evil and filled with all good, enjoying unfailingly the delight of eternal joys, forgetting all punishments. Yet it will not forget its own liberation, nor be ungrateful to its liberator. What are the saints doing? There is a kind of forgetting here. There's a forgetting of the punishments. There's a forgetting of, you could almost say, the delight and enjoyment of sin, which is its own punishment. But there is absolutely the remembering of being delivered from that. They remember their liberation. They remember their liberator. And in that sense, they remember sin and suffering. It's a distinction, and Augustine, in a passage we don't have here, goes on to make this, the distinction between the one who suffers from an illness and the doctor who knows an illness but doesn't suffer from it. That the cancer patient knows cancer within the suffering. And the oncologist knows cancer without the suffering. But also, the one whose cancer has been remitted has a memory of cancer and a kind of gratitude that is not available to the one who did not have it in the first place. You don't return to not having been a cancer patient, right? He's talking about something like that here. They do not pass over into ingratitude. They're full of gratitude, which means they're full of remembering, but it's a certain kind of remembering in gratitude. Secondly, nothing will give more joy to that city, he says, than this song, that song of remembrance and gratitude that each of them sings. This song to the glory of the grace of Christ, by whose blood we have been set free. There, that precept will find fulfillment. Be still and know that I am God. That will truly be the greatest of Sabbaths, a Sabbath that has no end, the Sabbath that the Lord approved at the beginning of creation, where it says, God rested on the seventh day from all his works, which he had been doing, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on that day he rested from all his works, which God had begun to do. Here's the turn. We ourselves shall become that seventh day, when we have been replenished and restored by his blessing and sanctification. There we shall have leisure to be still, and we shall see that he is God, whereas we wish to be that ourselves when we fell away. What is the everlasting Sabbath, the eschatological Sabbath? It is that enjoyment of the saints, enjoying their liberation, enjoying their memories configured to gratitude, enjoying telling it to one another, and enjoying hearing it from one another. They don't just exist in the Sabbath, on the Sabbath. They have become it. That is the final joy. They're at leisure to do only that. The only thing they want to do. They're full of memory, and they're full of each other's memory. Lastly, then, but now restored by him and perfected by his greater grace, we shall be still and at leisure for eternity, seeing that he is God, and being filled by him when he will be all in all. For all our good works, when they are understood as being his works, not ours, are then reckoned to us for that attainment of that Sabbath rest. Notice, the works, it's not that the works are remembered or forgotten. It's not the choice between there. The works are remembered. It's how they're remembered that is part of the beatific vision, beatific joy. It's the right memory of creation. It's the redeemed and sanctified memory of all of the things, of their whole lives, of their lives brought together in company, of the whole history of creation and salvation as one. The beatific vision from this, I take it, is that it absolutely has to do with gazing on the glory of God. And it absolutely has to do with gazing on that glory in and through each other. This isn't an apartment complex. They're not watching television alone, just happening to be next to each other, separated by walls. The enjoyment is giving that to one another, receiving it from one another, all as an act of gazing upon the glory of God. So varied and textured and rich and refracted that it is the heart's fulfillment, the fulfillment of the heart's desire. And along comes Karl Rahner to drain out the poetry. The proclamation of her own holiness is an eschatological statement, he writes, of faith, and not merely a kind of judgment of history which condescends not to overlook the good, which after all also exists over and above everything ugly. It isn't just the separation of the good from the bad and leave the bad behind, because what's going to get left behind? Always our bodies, always the things that are the tensions and the difficulties in the world. It's always going to be an escape to an idea. It's not that. That's not Christian hope. The church has a genuine history. Real people, real place, real time, real stuff. A unique history of salvation and hence also of holiness. Even though the essence of Christian holiness remains always the same, it does not simply always happen in the same way in each saint. The difference between saints, which no one would deny, are not merely sublime accidents of a merely temporal kind, which are of no consequence for the holiness itself which they realize. No, precisely these unique accidents of history, the individual factor, let's make it really poetic now, the physiognomic element of the saints enters into eternity with them, into that eternity which is not something purely abstract, but the genuine and permanent individual product of history. Thick, rich humanity is what he's talking
Kind
about.
of writes like St. Paul.
He kind of writes like a German. Yeah. Thick, rich humanity, full of memory. Not the taking apart of what's pleasing and what's unpleasing, turning the whole thing into a pleasing offering. The way it's remembered through its liberator. So I want to ask you a question that you don't have to answer out loud. Would you really want to have a full memory of your life? Of creation? I mean, this sounds like, oh yes, that'll be good to have full memory. But think about that, to have full memory. Or how about this, if this were put to you as a hypothetical, or maybe you were on the threshold of this actually becoming the case. Would you rather be completely ignorant or completely mindful of everything? Remember everything or forget everything? I don't do drugs, but I listen to podcasts. So here's another one. In Defense of Ignorance was the title of this podcast, in This American Life. There's a condition called HSAM, people who have hyperactive memories. They remember, well, maybe some of you are them, so I won't say they. Those among us. Remember more than most people remember. They can't help but remember more. In some ways they want to, and that feeds it, and in other ways they don't, but they can't help it. So I want to listen to this little clip, which is going to be about one of these women with HSAM. The interviewer, also a woman's voice. The interviewer has talked a little bit about like a breakup with her boyfriend and the difficulty of like getting past it and how she had to like forget some things and was intentionally forgetting some things. And she's talking to this woman with HSAM for whom that is not an option, right? So that question, would you rather be completely mindful, remember everything, or ignorant, forget everything? Because I really want to press this point of what Augustine is saying with the book of Revelation presents to us, what Rahner is trying in his German way to put forth, that we're full of memory.
Jill Price also has HSAM. She just turned 50 and says she's got 50 years of stuff. And the steamer trunk is humongous. We're shifting metaphors a little.
So if you were, you have like every day is like a bag of garbage, and then you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and it's a fresh day, and you can like throw that garbage bag out from the day before. I don't have that. I got massive amounts of just piled up garbage bags everywhere. It didn't like paralyze me until my husband died. Like that, his death has really like paralyzed me.
How was it paralyzing?
Because I will never, ever, ever, ever forget that.
Of course, no one forgets their spouse dying. But for Jill, it's different.
I am still in March of 2005.
When he died.
Yeah. Not every minute, but I could really put myself in that week and feel it, and
So it hurts like it happened yesterday.
yeah. Now the feeling that I was not going to survive, I don't feel that way anymore because I have survived, but
How often do you think about that?
all of it, probably like 10 times a day. Even though I get up every day, I feel like I'm still standing in the same place. It's like, it's really being stuck. It's being stuck in a moment that you can't, there's no escaping it.
Do you wish that you could forget it?
Yeah. Or remember it the way normal people remember it.
How do normal people remember it?
I don't know. But it's not like, I don't think that somebody would be sitting here 11 years later still like feeling it the way I feel it. See, I wish you could understand, and I wish I could understand what it's like to be able to like let things fade and or not let, just that's the way it is.
Jill says it's not like she's only reliving bad memories. She likes to go back to one of her favorite afternoons, October 19th, 1979, in the 9th grade, when she had a bad day at school and her mom surprised her with homemade soup when she got home. But when the bad ones come on, she can't help but get emotional, and they come on all the time. If you did not have HSAM, how do you think your life would be different today?
I think that I would have been able to move forward. I think I probably would be married today. I don't think I would be so scared. I would be able to just walk forward instead of constantly looking back. Okay, so let's reverse this so that maybe you understand.
Yeah.
So your boyfriend, you guys broke up.
Yeah.
How long were you upset about it, or until the point where you felt like you can move forward without thinking about it all the time, or move forward without it ripping your heart out?
Oh, God. 3 months.
I don't have that luxury.
And so, are you jealous of me?
No.
No?
Mm-mm. Because I, on the flip side of all that, I can't imagine what it's like to not remember my life. I really can't understand how nobody does. Even though it has tormented me, it's just, everything is so important to me that I hold on to it so tight that I wouldn't want to not be able to do that.
I'm not jealous of her either. Ever since talking to these people with HSAM, for the first time in my life, I actually feel just fine about forgetting. I know that sounds like it's the end of the radio story, this is just what you say, but I cannot stress how sincere I am about this. Totally fine about forgetting.
That just struck me when I was listening to it, right? Especially when she says, I don't wish I didn't have this. I can't imagine not remembering, because the whole thing seems headed towards, I would absolutely want to forget.
Yeah.
Which just poses to me this problem of the promise of full memory, or, on the other hand, the destiny of full forgetting. And I think, for me at least, touches on that nerve of being able to remember, being granted that gift through a redeemed, sanctified memory. It can't be the memory exactly as I have ordained this memory. This is the very last few things I'll say. First, Dante had this insight in writing the Purgatorio, in the movement into the heavenly paradise, before there, in his entrance to the earthly paradise, in scenes filled with liturgical and biblical imagery. Dante is cleansed of his purgatorial journey not once, but twice, through the river Leth and through the river Uno. The first passing through the river takes away all memory. It's the same river on the other side of the earthly paradise, where he's joined with others in the earthly paradise, and that passing through the water restores to him the memory of all good. In this invisible moment at the top of the purgatory, at the end of the purgatorial journey, Dante sort of stretched out the terrain to point out what happens in the transformation in the Christian life, in the entrance in to the full memory of God and the saints. A sort of erasure of memory, all the addictions and clutchings we have to our faulty way of seeing and remembering. The cleansing of that, seeing through sin, selfishness, envy, pride, lust, greed, sloth. But not taking everything away, giving it back. Broken and blessed. A new memory. A memory through that vision, that light that's only given in Christ's love. That's the second passing that he has at the top of the Purgatorio. Lastly, then, I want to just say something about saints to whom I have a particular veneration, who are close at hand, who the Sanctoral Cycle don't necessarily bring to me. But what I want to say is that the ones who are venerated, personally for me, I think what the Sanctoral Cycle is doing is asking me now to stretch further, to move from those familiar and close at hand to those a little more unfamiliar and not close at hand, to move into that communal sanctified memory of the church. Two of my saints, as it were, one's beatified, Franz Jagerstätter, the martyr of the Third Reich, the Austrian farmer, Third Order Franciscan, who died giving a solitary witness, executed for refusing conscription into the Nazi army, whose voice was squashed, who only wrote letters to his wife and his children, who had no imagination about his voice ever being heard. It was a historical accident or providence that his voice ever was heard. Here's a man ripped from his family, ripped from his home, who wrote a letter to his children telling him by the time they read it he would be dead, but giving to them what was most precious to him, standing in fidelity to Christ, no matter what. Actually being a good father to them through that, not choosing them or his faith, actually saying, this is how I am a good father to you. I give you what is most precious. But for Franz Jagerstätter to enjoy, to be enrolled in the beatific company, is not for all of that to go away. It's to take that with him. Because somebody was there, one of these saints, in those cells with the other ones who are forgotten. And in him in heaven, they are remembered. And his children, who we would not have known about if not for Gordon Zahn finding a random reference of this guy in a parish registry. And his wife Francisca would be remembered in him. Or how about this one that is more familiar to all of us, who I also have personal devotion to, Mother Teresa, whose whole journey into holiness was about hastening to those dark holes of neglect, where the unwanted, the unclaimed, the unloved were shoved inside, abandoned. To enroll Mother Teresa in the canon of the saints, to acclaim her as participating in the beatific joy, means not that she has been separated from them. It means that in her, the memory of them, the unwanted, the unclaimed, the unloved, abides in God's glory. Her memory of them is Christ's memory of them. Christ's memory of them has become her memory of them. To be commanded, as it were, I put this on the level of duty, the ones we have to venerate. To be commanded to remember and venerate means proclaiming in faith that Christ assumed that moment in history. In the flesh of these saints, Christ's redemption touches others. And it's by those bonds, the bonds of our humanity, that we're saved. Christ's humanity assuming ours. Ours being assumed by him. The saints participating in that assumption. In Teresa, the names of the unknown are known by someone. We're always tempted, I think, to leave the ugliness behind, to want to skirt it away. But the saints say no. Become transparent to Christ. Become a color in his spectrum. See in his light. Become part of his light. Grab the others into that light. Remember them. Here's the last thing I'll say then. To remember the saints is not to remember an individual. Again, it's to remember that they're in them, humanity, that humanity, with those love and those sins, those violences and suffering and charity, has become a site of redemption. The promises of Christ are efficacious, have been, are now, and will be. And as we practice venerating the saints, as we practice seeing them, remembering them, moving into their memory, we're actually practicing heaven. We're practicing what we will do. And as we learn to delight in that, we're learning to delight in what's good for us, what will be given to us unendingly, when we're transformed, made capable. I like, therefore, to sort of riff on St. Jerome. Ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ. Why? Because this is how you recognize who Christ is, not the Jesus of your imagination. But in this, maybe we could also say the ignorance of the saints is ignorance of Christ. By them, we come to recognize the full spectrum of his glory. We learn to like it, to love it, to anticipate it, to desire it. And let's leave it at that. Thanks.